And welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to current events. We've got a great panel of folks here today, some of the usual suspects, some joining us sporadically, but also great contributors. Welcome, guys. We're going to deal with three topics as we usually do. I guess the Trinity is a holy thing, the magic of threes, as they say. The first topic today is going to be about France and Germany drawing up plans for proposed associate membership into the EU for the UK. I think we're going to have to rely heavily on our UK portion of the panel for the sort of details of this, but we can discuss whether or not this is actually good. Is this countering Brexit? What does this exactly mean? Also, the UK's House of Lords has passed the controversial online safety bill. Thank God these people are always looking out for our safety and passing laws that protect us from ourselves. Yes, this is designed to regulate the types of negative things that we're seeing happening online and for misuse of things online from teenagers and stuff like this. What do you think about these kinds of laws? Are they reasonable protections or an infringement on liberties? Is it a bit of both? Can there be a bit of both? I don't think those two are compatible. Also, The Guardian says the darndest things. The Guardian is claiming that hard work is not the key to social mobility. If you thought it was, you're living a delusion, because generational wealth seems to be a real thing, and that matters more than hard work. You got to figure the Guardian would promote that kind of narrative, but let's see if we can counter it. I'm not sure if we can. Let's see if we can. Let's start first with this EU stuff, and I have to start with our resident Europeans over there, Marcus and Richard. To describe this situation, if you can, and what it potentially means for England going forward.
Well, first of all, to answer the question, the UK never actually joined the European Union. The UK in 1973 joined a treaty, a trade agreement effectively with other European countries. And in 2009, Gordon Brown signed the Treaty of Lisbon, which got the EU up and running and effectively created a standalone legal entity, which is effectively another word for a separate government. At the time, it's quite funny that Gordon Brown actually didn't attend the ceremony when all the other countries signed, because he knew that his own party, the Labour Party, was made up of people who were against it. So he just signed the treaty in some bunker, hiding somewhere from the people.
On his own,
yeah. Go on.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The EU is typically the playground of the mixed economy, where bureaucrats thrive and failed politicians from all over the continent usually fail upwards and get jobs when they screw up in their own place. At the moment, this proposal of creating a 40 years level of membership for the EU is just a proposal. But if you know how the EU works, you know that when they propose something, usually in a matter of a few years' time, that becomes a law. Take, for example, the EU bonds, which is the mutualized bond issues, debt issues from the whole Eurozone area, where they got a monetary union. That they didn't have a European Eurozone-wide bond related to it. Of course, COVID comes along, and that was a perfect opportunity, a perfect crisis to sneak in, change legislation, and they start to issue Eurobonds with the really cynical name Euro Next Generation, meaning the next generation will pay for that debt.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we left the EU, finally, after a lot of infighting and a lot of politics going on, we signed a withdrawal agreement, which is a bit like leaving your hostage takers and having to sign some paperwork and take away the paperwork. And the paperwork essentially means that thereafter, everything you do, you need to check back in with your previous hostage makers to see if they like it or not, or see if you can still do it or not. So you're not even free outside as you should be. We should have left properly and become an independent nation setting our own path. I think the idea of the 4 tiers, which as ever with everything in the EU is proposed by Germany and France. Germany and France always come up with the ideas, especially if they relate to Britain. And they're doing the same now, even though we're not even in the EU. And the 4 tiers argument is that there'd be different tiers at different levels of membership, but they include 2 crucial elements. One is that you have to pay for it. So you'd be funneling billions back into the EU again. One of the points was that you don't do that. And the second would be that you'd have judicial overview of the European Central Court of Justice, which means essentially that every law is decided by the EU, if not immediately, then in the court pretty soon and imposed on you anyway. So, you know, plus ça change.
That's frightening. Now, do you think, I also think I read in the article that they want to expand the jurisdiction of the EU. There's something like 27 member states now. They want to extend it to over 40 plus. Now, is this an act of desperation on the part of the EU? I mean, I know they're in the red. And they need money. Incorporating these states isn't an act of kindness on their part. It never is when politicians want to extend influence. It's usually an act of desperation. Is that what this is? Am I misreading that situation?
I think that's definitely in a kind of a pickle right now, because the few things that are now coming home to roost. Things like the consequences of the crisis that they had in 2010, where Ireland, Portugal, and Greece had to be bailed out. That has caused consequences, and then compounded with the largesse of the COVID spending, and of course the fact that every European country caused up to various dictators across the world, including Putin and Xi Jinping, means that once these reveal themselves to be the baddies that we always thought they were, and now you have to get away from them and trying to cover the holes that cause. And right now, I think they spent about 800 billions on gas and stuff like that in order to compensate for Russia. But they're definitely in a tight spot right now.
And even the French banks like BNP Paribas has advised their own customers to move money out of the EU and into the UK. So why would we want to rejoin? So we can pay them?
Indeed. Kirk, I've given up on the dark continent. Sorry, Mark. Well, not sorry. You guys are in the UK, so you're not really part of the continent. The European continent seems to me to be a pit of despair, philosophically, economically, politically. What do you make of this? So I don't really follow the news so much in Europe. I consider them to be the last place I would look for information for my life going forward, or to inform the United States government. What do you make of this whole EU thing?
Well, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm not really as knowledgeable as Marco and Richard on the economics and political state of Europe and the UK and the European Union. But to my knowledge, doesn't the European Union offer some benefits? Hasn't it made trade and movement of labor and movement of people a lot easier in a lot of ways? I know that comes with a baggage of the overarching bureaucracy, overarching regulations. And even according to this Guardian article, the fourth circle offers countries like the UK political cooperation without having to be bound to EU law. It's hard to tell what that means, but to me that maybe sounds like, yeah, you get to have the benefits of liberal movement and easier trade, easier flow of goods without having to deal with the overarching regulatory scheme. What do you guys make of that? Or do you guys think that's kind of pretext? You guys think that's kind of it's undermined by what you guys mentioned earlier about the whole judicial stuff?
I think there's one key point there is, as an independent country, you can set your own rules for movement and freedom of people and that kind of stuff. So the whole point that you need to belong to some other bloc in order to determine something is largely nonsense, because if you offer people the opportunity to migrate to your country, then very quickly you're going to see the benefits of that, and they're going to want to do the same if they don't already. And lots of the changes have been pretty minimal since we left in terms of that, because that's how the West operates. That's how the economies operate anyway. And the point is always that the European Court of Justice will sit in the background. It won't determine the law until it has to, until France tells it to, and then it will. But you're always told that it won't be the EU that makes the law, but it always is. That's always.
But Kirk is saying something sort of interesting. We had a similar situation here during the founding of the United States when we were a confederation of states. The states were sort of in economic war with each other. They decided not to pay their debts to European countries, and we got together to reform the government, to put it under the umbrella of a federal government, to sort of unify it, to prevent the kinds of legislation that was propping up in the states that were anti-competitive. And does the EU do that, or does it create a freer trade environment between European countries?
I think the problem is you can't join the UK to the EU successfully because we operate by common law, where everything's allowed unless it's against the law, and they operate by a permissive law, by only telling you what you can do. And if you try and merge those two together, you can't do them under the same federalist system. They just don't fit. They fight each other.
And the issue is that, yes, we were in a open market within the boundary of Europe, because it's actually a very highly protectionistic market. But since we left, we actually joined the CPTPP, which is a trans-Pacific trade agreement with Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and Canada, and other people. But to do that, we didn't have to give up our sovereignty. We didn't have to lose democracy for it. And why couldn't we do the same thing? That's what Britain was pushing to. We wanted more freedom within the EU. We didn't want to leave the market. The market was effectively, the common market was effectively a British invention. Was pushed by Margaret Thatcher. But we wanted freedom of trade. That's why Britain joined in the first place. But this became a political thing where supremacy of European law was taken by bureaucrats in Brussels, and we couldn't do anything about it.
Okay, I would also push back with this. The title of the show today is "Should Britain Rejoin the EU?" I'd probably rethink that and say what Britain should do is embrace free markets. And from what I can tell, a lot of the complaints about Brussels, which I think are legitimate, a lot of times the UK imposes trade restrictions on itself, as we're going to talk about here in a minute with the online safety bill and carbon mandates and a bunch of other nonsense regulatory schemes that the UK has imposed on itself for the last half century, few decades.
Sure. And this is part of the problem, is that since we left, we're not doing it right. We're not paving the way that we should be. We're not showing the free trade route that is possible by being an independent country. But we're not doing that from a government level. But lots of businesses are looking at markets differently. They are trading more with the rest of the world. They're not concentrating only on Europe, which is why our manufacturing has just overtaken France, and we've just moved up to 8th place. In the rankings, and we've been growing at 8.7% since Brexit, as opposed to Germany at 8.1% and Italy at 6.1%. So despite all the narrative that we've been doing worse since we left, it's just factually untrue. And I think what's going on at the moment, and I think it's true in lots of different countries, is that each country is being fed the narrative that everywhere else in the world is doing better than them, and they're in the doghouse. Whereas that's not actually true. And in Britain, it's Brexit that's always trotted out as the reason. And every COVID spending implication is always ignored as a factor in that.
We're kind of paying the establishment is violently against our decision to leave the EU. Bits of the government, party across the political spectrum, are absolutely against the whole idea of the stupid people choosing their own independence versus some piddly billions that you might get or might not get from the European markets. And this it's been so obvious since we left and during the process of trying to leave the quagmire of the European orbit, if you like. And they're trying just to leave open the back door for a soft re-enter by stealth, really. They're trying to go back in without having to trigger another referendum because they think we are stupid enough not to realize it.
Even that withdrawal agreement I mentioned at the beginning, that hostage thing I was talking about, had a clause in it that it should be reviewed in 2025. Well, I mean, that left us a long time to live life outside, didn't it?
Michael, as an outsider, as an American like myself, what do you make of all this European drama?
Well, like you, I don't know much about the EU and Brexit other than what I hear or have heard in the American media. I do. It does seem like some shenanigans are at play, though, when they start talking about the new thing where you're not going to actually be part of an EU, but we're going to make these tiers. So it seems like something shady is up. But there is an interesting dynamic here, and I've struggled with this for a long time. Mark, you pointed out that at the founding of the country that we were in this dilemma where there were trade restrictions between states. There were all kinds of problems. They weren't paying their debts. So the solution to that was to create a stronger central government that would free up trade and unify things a little bit better. And that kind of, by implication, that was kind of what we're talking about in regard to the EU. But did it actually work? And I don't know that it did. I'm not saying it didn't. I'm just saying that the first 5 presidents under Washington, we had the Bank of the United States violated the Constitution. Under Adams, Alien Sedition Acts violated the Constitution. Jefferson, Louisiana Purchase violated the Constitution. Madison rechartered the bank after arguing it against it, violates the Constitution, and then the Monroe Doctrine. And then as far as trade goes, the very clause in the Constitution meant to free trade between the states, the Commerce Clause, ends up being the clause that they use to restrain trade. And I ultimately don't know what the solution to that is. I mean, I know that my answer is, well, good philosophy is the solution. Well, it is, but will governments actually ever stay within the bounds that we set for them, whether it be under a confederated republic like the Articles of Confederation or a stronger central government, or whether it be Britain apart from the EU or as a part of it? And I just don't know. And it's, like I said, it's something that I've struggled with for a long time.
I think as long as there is room for them to move, it's like in jiu-jitsu. You give somebody a little bit of space, they take it, the government will take it. So you have to have an ironclad constitution that doesn't have contradictions, can't be misinterpreted a billion different ways, as the Constitution has been almost from the very beginning.
Well, Mark, can I just say, here's my problem, and I don't necessarily disagree, but in my experience, words on paper are just that. Unless the character of the people involved in the philosophy of the people involved is strong, you can put anything on paper. When I was incarcerated, we had this program called Alternative to Violence Project, and there were inmates that were facilitators. We were responsible for facilitating the groups. And the other inmates, a large portion of them, were behaving completely contrary to what the program represented. So we come off looking like a bunch of hypocrites. So I had the genius idea, well, let's have a code of ethics and we'll all sign it, and that'll be that. So we all signed the code of ethics. The problem is the character wasn't there. So then, well, we can't be that rigid and stuck to it, and it just ends up going astray. So, I mean, the Constitution, I think, is an important thing, but unless the character of the country or the district or wherever it's going to govern are in favor of it, it's just so many words on paper.
I think the founders understood this. That's why John Adams understood that in order for a republic to be sustained, the population has to be moral. Of course, they looked to Christian morality at the time for their guidance, but certainly there's a secular morality that we're trying to bring to the world that I think is much better, not rife with all those contradictions. Well, so I guess Marco and Richard, we know you guys are Brexit folks. You like the sovereignty, the country sovereignty thing, and I distrust this tier thing as well. Like you, Kirk, I feel like whenever the government puts a wedge anywhere, creates differences between at certain levels, at some point, the most consistent level wins, which is the one at which there is the greatest power to exert over the most people. So I feel like those insiders at the gold level are going to get privileges that everybody's going to want to get into at some point, and eventually everything becomes the gold level. So eventually you're under the umbrella of European law or you're not. What say you to that?
Yeah, it's always been a process of ever further integration. And this would just be another way of getting ever further integration with labeled ladders, or labeled steps on the ladder. and you'd be constantly being compared with every nation on the other steps of the ladder, and only the statistics which favored further integration would be highlighted. And that's how it's always worked, and that would be the same system. And when the tiers would be introduced, if such a thing happened, this is only a proposal, would be introduced for new countries, it would be once again as if it's a path towards an ultimate goal, and that is an inevitable outcome that everybody would desire only when they've been educated enough.
I mean, there already are different tiers. You got the 27 countries, that you have the smaller group of Eurozone countries, the people who are the countries who adopt the euro as a currency. And then you have countries like Norway, who are part of the economic area, but so they pay into the EU, but they haven't got any representation on the parliament, and they don't take any seats on the table, really.
So what do they pay for? Do they just pay for the trade privileges that they get?
In order to access the market, but they already regret it. Most of the population are not very happy with the arrangement, which is understandable, because they're subjected to all sorts of stupid laws, stupid environmental regulation, and they haven't got a say about it.
And the history of the EU is that every time any nation in it votes against what the EU wants, they're either made to vote again, or the initial vote is simply ignored. And that's kind of what's going on now. They tried to make us vote a second time. Several general elections essentially reinforced the point that we did want to, as a nation, leave. And yet now this is the alternative, is to actually not make it real.
The Lisbon Treaty, which created the EU itself, was just a second iteration of what was called the European Constitution. The European Constitution was subject to a couple of referendums across European countries. France, the population decided not to go for it, so that they cut it down. Ireland did the same; they rejected it, and the same thing for Holland. So the bureaucrats just changed the title, rearranged a couple of paragraphs, and they presented it as Lisbon Treaty, and that was signed bypassing the will of the people. It wasn't even proposed as a referendum.
But it's still a constitution with all that means.
It's the same document, rearranged. It's been admitted by the guy who actually wrote, what's his name? Giscard d'Estaing? No.
Yeah.
I
can't remember.
Delors,
Yeah.
Jacques Delors.
Yeah.
That he's just rearranged a few paragraphs and represented it.
Yeah, folks, if there's a class war out there at all, as the commies like to tell us, the class war is between us and the political class. Everybody versus the political class. They're trying to take your moral agency from you, which I think segues perfectly into this next article about the UK House of Lords trying to vote in this new piece of legislation. I don't know if they vote in legislation in the House of Lords, but this new piece of legislation that will essentially protect you from yourself and enable you to not, pursue your responsibility to take care of your own children and police the internet the way you should, or turn off the internet when you can. Because folks, you can't do that on your own. You need some legislator who tells you what to do. Michael, I want to go with you first, even though you're not in the UK. I hate these laws. When they try to do them in the United States, I hate them, because it's like, if you can't be a parent to your child and keep them off the internet, you're the one with the power to keep that cell phone out of their hands, to put the types of stuff on there that can guard them, and the programs on there that can police their internet if they use it, or use it while you're present in the room. We're increasingly just sloughing off more of our moral agency to these bureaucrats, and that's disturbing to me.
It is to me as well. I think that there's room for laws. If something's illegal anyway, it ought to be illegal on the net. For instance, if you are threatening somebody, just because it's on the net, it should be illegal. Or if I'm going to conspire with somebody, commit a crime, that should be illegal. But whenever these politicians start talking about passing laws because we've got to protect the kids, my skin crawls, because it's such a cop-out, and it's so easy, and it's such an emotional appeal. The children, you can't legalize drugs. Why? Because the children might get their hands on it. Prostitution, the children, they're going to be corrupted.
Meanwhile, there was an article in the New York Post about kids getting a hold of fentanyl and dying
Yeah.
even though it's an illegal drug.
Yes, and you can't get rid of zoning laws, because if you get rid of zoning laws, you're going to end up with a strip joint on every corner. It's just, it's absurd. Same thing with education. Well, the kids, they need this, they need that. So whenever these politicians start talking that, red flags go up all over the place for me. And I'm with you 100%, Mark. If you're a parent, police your own kids. Don't put restrictions on my liberty, on your liberty, and everybody else's, because you don't have the time to check what your kid's doing on the internet. If you don't have the time to check what your kid's doing on the internet, don't have kids.
Yeah, or if you don't have the cashews to not give your kid a cell phone because all the other kids have it.
They do all have it, yes.
Yeah, so they do all have it, and after all, you're going to be stigmatized and outside if your kid doesn't have it or has a restricted use of it. Kirk, I mean, what I love about America is an Americanism, is it's almost knee-jerk hostility to authoritarian moves like this. We've been turning European over the past 125 years, though, but there's still that sense of rugged individualism where we say, don't tread on me for anything. So do you have the same kind of knee-jerk reaction when you see laws like this cropping up?
Oh, absolutely, especially considering that the UK does not have an explicit protection of free speech like we have in America. And the fact that its hate speech laws have been applied to comedians. The most notable example is Count Dankula from a few years back. And if you read the article from the BBC about this, written by Chris Valance, it talks about the features. It's a 300-page bill. It's going to apply to big tech, but it suggests that over 20,000 small businesses will also have to comply, and platforms will need to show that they are committed to removing illegal content, including stuff like promoting or facilitating suicide, promoting self-harm, that kind of stuff. You know, there are some good aspects, you know, as Michael alluded to earlier, like terrorism. Yeah, that obviously should be illegal. Child sexual abuse, that should be illegal. But like promoting self-harm and facilitating suicide, I could easily see this being applied to comedians, especially, you know, if you are familiar with the history of the internet, a lot of these, you know, edgy comedy satire sites from the early days of the internet, like the best page in the universe.net by this guy named Maddox, who I'm a big fan of. I have his book right here. He's most known for harshly grading children's artwork. He wrote a book called I Am Better Than Your Kids. But on his website, almost 2 decades ago, he wrote an article, a joke article about how to kill yourself like a man, which includes eating a tub full of beans, headbutting the sidewalk, scooping out your eyeballs with an ice cream scoop and replacing them with Cadbury eggs. There's also another comedy website, which Wikipedia, it's Real Ultimate Power, which Wikipedia describes as a satire website written using the persona of a 13-year-old boy. That's a parody of adolescent fascination with ninjas. And they have a part on their website, how to commit seppuku by swallowing a Frisbee. And if you go to this website, it's still up. They have like a step-by-step process on how to kill yourself by folding a Frisbee and putting it in your mouth. And even has images of what appears to be a teenager folding a Frisbee. And it's obviously a joke, but I got to wonder, will these kinds of laws in the UK, will they apply to satirists who have had their websites on the internet for decades at this point? And even in the article, it talks about how the Opens Right group says it's a huge threat to freedom of expression, with tech companies expected to decide what is and is not illegal. And there are other concerns. I guess Wikipedia has also said that it won't be able to comply with some of the requirements. So yeah, the article says those who fail to comply face large fines of up to £18 million, or in some cases could face imprisonment. Executives can face imprisonment. So yeah, this is very alarming. And I would, well, you could say some of the aspects, again, like terrorism, could be legitimate functions of government. Yeah, when you talk about what about the children, we need to protect adults from themselves. And knowing the history of the UK and their laws being applied to comedy and satire, which are not harmful, yeah, I would be very worried if I were in the UK.
Marco, Richard, what say you about this? This freaks me out. First of all, any law, I mean, how many pages is the Constitution of the United States? Does anybody know? 3-4 pages, and yet we now have these massive omnibus bills in the United States that are 40,000 pages long, and a bill here that's 300 pages long. I'm sorry, but once the law becomes a cipher like that, when the normal citizen who's subject to the laws cannot understand them anymore, and it takes a legal scholar to go through the 300 pages of legal jargon to translate it for you, that is not a law. That is not a law.
Yeah.
What say you guys to this craziness?
Absolutely. And it's complex and vague. Now, the fact it's passed the Lords basically means it is law now. The King signs it. That's a mere formality and it's law. But it's summed up by the phrase at the beginning of the bill, which says that they want to make the UK the safest place in the world to be online by placing new duties on social media companies. And that's the crux of the bill in a sentence. And it's the social media companies who would have to pay for all of this. In fact, they can be charged up to, believe it or not, and just wait for this, 10% of their global annual turnover. So if you can imagine what 10% of TikTok
wait a minute, but doesn't this also make the private social media companies the policemen for the government, since they're more or less doing their bidding? This is what happened with Facebook, and this is what happened with Twitter when they were following government diktats, thinking they were doing the right thing. Maybe some of them were cynically not in that page, but they used private enterprise as an editor, to do their dirty bidding for them. Now that's scary, because for objectivists, where like a private company can do what it wants to do, it can impose the rules that it wants to. But when they become an arm of the government, I mean, this creates all kinds of complexities for us with respect to censorship, does it not?
And that's the perfect. If I ever want an example of what a mixed economy statist legislation looks like, this is it. It's designed to effectively give more power to the state. The actual legislation doesn't even give you the standard what is legal, what's not legal, but tasks a so-called arm's length body of the government to come up with a legislation. Now these guys are empowered to go out and start defining what the standard or legal, no legal, harmful, no harmful is.
And just to add to that point a second, here's a quote from the bill, which is typical of that point Mark has just made. It refers to content that does not meet a criminal threshold, but.
But, the infamous but, that invalidates everything before it. I love that.
In terms of determining what hate crime is, or what sexual exploitation is, or what controlling or coercive behavior is, each of these mentioned as reasons for stopping online content, it doesn't have to meet a criminal threshold, but.
And this is the typical tool that the first dictator passing by will actually use, and use it to smack us on our heads.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I was just going to say, what's depressing about this is you've got all groups coming together. You've got the traditionalists who want family values. You've got the socialists who want to control the big tech, and you've got the altruists who want their humanitarian or causes, whether it's bullying or racism or misogyny, brought to light, and all of it comes together to demand and bay for more statism.
And they'll clap for it. Yeah,
it's frightening. I'm sorry I hit you in the face, but you deserved it. Michael, did you want to say something? I thought I saw you raise your hand. I could be wrong.
No, I didn't raise my hand, but I actually do want to say something, because not only is censorship unjust, but the people that do the censoring are incredibly stupid. And in 2007 in Connecticut, where I live, there was a heinous home invasion, and I want to say a triple murder. And it turned out that the guys that did this, they had previously been in prison, and while they were in prison, they read Truman Capote's book In Cold Blood. So the geniuses in the prison system decided, okay, we've got to ramp up, protections and censorship of what type of books these guys are allowed to read. So they went through this process. So we were trying to get books, and it just takes forever to get them, because they got to go to the committee and here and there and everywhere else. And after all of that, and after all their censorship and restrictions on the types of books we had, they released the list. These are the books that have been approved that you can now have. On the list of approved books was Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, the book that started the whole damn thing to begin with. And I was just thinking, it's only government that does such stupid things.
Yeah, I feel like the people in the government have Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Do you guys agree with me? I feel like they make us sick and then they try to come to our rescue so that they can feel like they're the stars of the show. They make me want to puke. Folks, the political class is the most dangerous class in history. We need to marginalize them, not just by constitutions, but by our own ethics, which holds individualism to be a high virtue. Before we move on, Kirk, did you want to say anything in conclusion about this phenomenon?
Well, I'd recommend our viewers out there. Ayn Rand has a great essay related to this topic called Property Status of the Airwaves, where she talks about the history of regulation over broadcast radio and television and how it ultimately led to regulation of content over the airwaves. So, yeah, that's in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. So I would check that out if you guys have a copy. And if you don't, then maybe you should get one.
And by the way, yeah, look, when a political classman initiates legislation like this for your own good, it's actually mostly about them procuring more power. So when Roosevelt came up with the Communications Commission, Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, it wasn't about regulating the airwaves as much as it was about licensing pro-New Deal advertisers and pro-New Deal businesses and pro-New Deal news organizations. Everyone else got their licenses suspended and they are pushed out. And if you wonder how an establishment is born or how the New Deal could come to us via our history books as the saving grace of capitalism, that's why. Because a guy like that understood the political system. He understood that he had to knock out the competition to promote his own ideology, which is what he did. Just before we move on to the next topic, I have some super chats here. Ashley shrugged for $1.99. She says, Mark, what a cool t-shirt you're wearing today. That's right. Ashley created the reality check t-shirts. Thank you, Ashley. They look great. Daniel says, what about me? I guess he's part of this. Daniel, this was a European Union thing. So a comment came up in the European Union. Did you have something you wanted to contribute to that topic? Are you there?
No, just the fact that I live in Slovakia, which is still in the EU.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I do like Slovakia. When I used to drink the mulled wine over there, it was pretty awesome. Jonathan Hoenig for $1.90 or for $9.99. Don't want to short sell you there, Jonathan. Thank you so much for tuning in. Apollo Zeus for £2. To what degree was racism a factor in the outcome? I'm thinking of I guess this was with respect to Brexit. We in the United States heard a lot about Brexit being a fundamentally racist issue, not an economic one, not one about self-interest or sovereignty. How much of that is true, you guys who are in the thick of it there?
To be honest, I don't think it's racism at all. Britain is historically a very open country. People from the 1700s, people come in quite freely. I think it's just an excuse to lump up together a bunch of people who made the decision to vote for the wrong thing that the establishment didn't want. It's an easy way of piling up 70 million people and calling them stupid.
Yeah. And once again, you can set your own laws if you do the thing properly, and then you can prove openly that it's not a racist agenda at the end of it, because you can invite immigrants from across the world who have the talent and ability to come and thrive in the UK.
No, let's not forget the Anglosphere includes lots of countries, lots of different cultures, and they are all embodied in the Anglosphere. Well, folks, the next topic doesn't surprise me so much that it was written in The Guardian, but apparently wealth is not a thing that you can earn by hard work, dedication, commitment to rational values. The real thing is generational. So if you start out, with wealth, you're going to, that generational wealth will be maintained for 30, 40 generations. If you start out at the bottom, you're likely to stay at the bottom. Now, I think the idea is to get up there so that you can maintain that general wealth for 30 or 40 more generations for people. That seems to be the idea, the impetus behind many people getting wealthy if they can. But some of the things that they described, aside from demographics, which I think the demographics just seemed really silly. It was like a correlation, not actual causation. But it's like, let's just deal with this. For some of the things they described to me, actually, I saw the government's hairy hand coming in and impeding progress. Like they talked about the housing prices in London being so high, and that to have a house in London is quite an institution almost to pass on to generations to come, and yet the housing is probably high because of the laws and restraints and restrictions against building that are probably in London. So let's start with our UK guys. What do you say to that?
Well, funny that here we got a member of an elite of people who come from immigrant background, who studies in Oxford and progresses up to become a candidate for the Labour Party, and is telling us that the road that she took is not actually possible to take. Like, what? This woman is actually not just a Guardian, the average Guardian writer, the average clown. She's actually a candidate for the Labour Party. She stood up around not far from here. She lost, thankfully, but she's quite a nasty piece of work. After the election, let me quote. Speaking after the result, she said, "This was the biggest injustice the Tories can enjoy tonight because they won, but me and you and all the troublemakers have got to come for them tomorrow. We should have won. We really should have won." Does that remind you of anyone? And
Yes.
Another enlightened comment she made is like, the war should be fuller with people like, wait for it, AOC. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, you're just confirming my premise from last time that collectivists are assholes. But go ahead, keep going.
And in the article itself,
says that. Yeah, at the end it says she's a visiting professor in practice at the London School of Economics. So I assume that means she teaches economics at prestigious universities
but
in
Kirk,
the UK.
even though Hayek taught there, nobody knows Hayek in the London School of Economics. I actually talked to a producer who graduated from the London School of Economics, and I said, "Oh, so you're familiar with Hayek's work?" Who? He actually said, "Who?"
Well, the LSE is famously a factory of Marxists. So
it is. In fact, the actual professorship where she's a visiting professor is the school within it is called the International Inequalities Institute within the London School of Economics.
No, that's not prejudicial. That's not prejudicial. Come on.
Absolutely. And one of the key elements of the article is, of course, the argument that we've heard since forever about the fixed pie. She says that the logic of social mobility requires someone to move down for others to move up. I mean, how many times have we heard about the fixed pie when, as she herself, as Marco pointed out, moved from working in Greggs, which is like the McDonald's of bakeries, to becoming a professor at a major university and having a PhD?
Yeah, it seems to me that privileged folks like that, children of privilege, and I'm assuming that there must be some of that in there. They have the most contempt for wealth. I mean, were her parents poor before her? Or were they sort of in the privileged?
No, they were poor. Yes.
So she has the example. She has the example of hardworking people making it. See, that's even worse because some of the Marxists that I know, they've acquired Marxism in academia. They sort of resent the wealth of their parents. They don't understand where the wealth comes from because it came easy to them. So they adopt this thing, or they see other people that have less than them, and it sort of touches their hearts and they adopt this. But to somebody who actually came from that, there's got to be, I mean, to deny the reality of that either requires cynicism, a hard cynicism. You think she's just trying to get political power and she's just cynical and using that to get political power?
Not just cynical. I mean, as I said, as a candidate, she was supporting Corbyn, his anti-Semitic agenda. Not to mention that she actually called Israel an apartheid state. So she's beyond. I don't know what she's on about. But what she's doing is actually talking about cause and effect. She's denying the effect of what she's actually experienced herself. Why do you think so many immigrants come to Britain? To do what? To be poorer than when they were before? To have a worse life than they had before? They come here because they know they can work hard and make their life better.
I think it's a case of pulling up the drawbridge after you've got to the top and trying to dissuade and discourage anybody else from trying, as well as some embarrassment at the notion of being successful as a cultural shame.
Wow, Michael, what do you make of this? This is very disturbing to me, this article, this woman's perspective, and now learning more about her as a person makes it even more disturbing.
I don't know about in the UK, but I know that in America, the idea of generational wealth is largely a myth. And I know that because I had a debate with an editor from Mother Jones magazine. And I don't know, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a very leftist magazine. And I debated him. I had him on my show because I read an article he had written about the problem of generational wealth. So I looked into it, and it was just not true what he was saying. Most millionaires are self-made. They're not born that way. Even most billionaires are not born that way. So that's the first thing, is that I question the validity of the study that she's talking about, but I haven't read it, so I can't really critique it. But more broadly, the idea that hard work pays off is implicit to the argument for capitalism. It's that in a free market, when you work hard, you produce, you can succeed. Last time I checked, Great Britain is not a free market. So if you have this generational wealth, then the question becomes one of economics, and you have to say, well, why is this happening? And I don't believe it's because of the free market. I highly, highly doubt it, but because oftentimes the critics of capitalism criticize capitalism for things that are the government's fault, that are a result of the policies that they've supported in the past. They don't get the results, and they keep criticizing capitalism. We move farther away from capitalism, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think people also treat the percentage of wealthy people, the 1%, which probably includes most of the people in the United States when you're comparing them to the rest of the world, as the same group of people, when they're actually not. People go into wealth and fall out of wealth all the time. People being a millionaire 3 times and 4 times in their life and then losing it and going back to poverty is a rather common thing in America. And when people say to me, a guy like Bezos doesn't deserve his billions of dollars, or even to become the first trillionaire because he got seed money or something from his parents to the tune of a couple $100,000, that makes him privileged. I turn to them and say, you turn $200,000 into $1 trillion empire, go. And you know what? They can't. They'll never admit it, but they can't. This is just so disturbing on so many levels, guys. Let me just read a couple super chats real fast. John Hendy for $4.99. What do you guys think are the most pro-liberal European countries? Personally, I think Switzerland and Czechia probably hit the mark. Is that the Czech Republic? What is that? Czechia. Forgive my ignorance.
Yeah.
Okay, so say Czech Republic, man. So what do you guys think, being sort of on the other side of the pond, closer to the action than us?
Well, to be honest, I would speak up in favor of the UK, because it is a pretty great place to do business, and that's often proved in the reality of doing business, not what governments say, what politicians say. I think it's true that some places like in the Eastern Bloc have certainly got the drive to thrive and succeed, which we have lost through a little bit of apathy and decay. But we're not totally doomed yet. We still have it in our blood, and in the blood of many of the people who got the enthusiasm to make something of their own lives.
Hey, can I just say really quick, one of the things that bothered me about Brexit, guys, was when I visited Paris, I could no longer go to a fully stocked Marks and Spencer. And that meant for my wife, no more Marks and Spencer peanut butter. That sucked. Anyway, go ahead. I just interrupted you. Sorry.
Sorry, it's gone.
But if you want peanut butter,
freest countries. He said Switzerland and the Czech Republic. You guys, you're maintaining UK is still freer. What do you got? What do you say?
Switzerland. One thing to say about Switzerland is they have a referendum every day of the week on something or other, and that is not a particularly easy way to run anywhere. And one of the most restrictive things in Switzerland is the restriction on building, which means that fields that should have all sorts of cities in them are now just got really expensive little shacks and huts in them. And it's one of the most expensive places to buy property because of the restrictions on building opportunities. That's the kind of thing that obviously we don't want to see, even though it's a great place to do business in other ways.
I mean, I grew up in Italy, but when I came here, you can still feel the germ of the ideology that actually was transported in the United States and then generated the United States. You still have the sense that there is a bit of the feeling that you can make something out of your own life. You can work hard and make a life from scratch. which
there's a saying here in the United States, maybe it's in the UK too, from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, right? That's a real thing here in America. And I have to get on Michael's side. If there's 40 or 50 generations of wealth, I got to wonder how that wealth is being monopolized by political connections. Somehow, somewhere along the line, somebody is getting some privileges from government, because it's really, really hard in a free economy to maintain generational wealth, because somebody's going to be stupid along the line and lose it all, unless you got somebody keeping out competition. We have Hamad for $4.99. I don't know if you guys skipped this subject already, but did you know that the online safety bill mandates backdoors for the government in E2E messaging apps? Did you know that?
Yeah, well, relates to WhatsApp. Companies like WhatsApp and encryption services, they have watered down to some extent what they were planning to do originally, but they still are encouraging companies like WhatsApp to be able to find means of handing over messages, particularly if they relate to child exploitation and that kind of thing. But they're forcing the development of that on the social media companies at their own expense, by their own method, in order to do for the government to get the PR points of it. So yeah, that's the situation.
Go ahead.
Talk about sanction of the victim. You get the companies to be responsible for their own downfall.
There's sort of a great line, and I'm paraphrasing, from An Enemy of the People. If you have not read that play, you should read it, by Heinrich Ibsen, about a guy who stands against the entire community for the truth and for integrity. The whole community comes against him. It's very corrupt. But he talks about, one thing a free person has the right to do is to not spit in their own face, to not be to be a victim. Heinrich Ibsen says it better, so I recommend you read the play. Zion Perez for $5. Always pleased to hear from Michael, an inspiration. I think you're an inspiration as well, Michael. I always love to see you on the panel. It is pronounced Czechia. It's pronounced Czechia. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to say Czech Republic just because that's what I'm used to. Well, guys, I have some upcoming announcements here before we bid our objectivist and non-objective audience adieu. At 10 p.m. UK time, Life on Earth with Robert and Amy Nasir on the top 5 ways you're not selfish enough. Oh, I need to hear that. That sounds really, really good. I think they're both very good at articulating what the rational egoism is all about. And we need more of that, folks, because we need to win the day with that. We need people to embrace reason again, embrace individualism in whatever manner they do, so long as they're living virtues. That's all that matters to me. Well, folks, it's been a fun show. I appreciate the panel. I appreciate all you guys for contributing. I learned a lot from you today. And for all you guys out there, if you like this content, like and subscribe. We want this content to spread. And while you're doing that, remember to check your premises. Peace.